This segment of the Chopin podcast is brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States, presenters of the National Chopin Competition in Miami, Florida, January 2025.
Although Garrick Olson is, to this day, the only pianist from the United States ever to win gold at the International Chopin Competition in Warsaw, he's actually not the only American to have ever taken the top prize there. In 1990, no competitor won the gold medal, so for all intents and purposes, silver medalist Kevin Kinner won the competition that year. I was fortunate to meet Kevin Kinner recently on a video call, where I asked him about the controversy surrounding that competition. But first, I took him on a trip down memory lane, playing a tape of his performance of Chopin's third scherzo in C-sharp minor from Warsaw in 1990. Kevin inspired the imagination of the audience with his sincere and heartfelt performances throughout the competition that year, memorialized by one audience member who captured Kevin's particular style in the form of a cartoon.
We're looking at my hair, which was very nice to have that back then. And Chopin's nose. And I was very honored to receive that when I signed that cartoon by the cartoonist who gave that to me, because it was something that I aspired to really find Chopin in myself, to somehow fully identify, to be Chopin at the moment that I played him. And the fact that somebody felt that was reflected in my manner of playing was the ultimate compliment.
I guess this is the perfect segue, because now we can see the real you. I don't know. Do we call it a mullet? What do we call the hair when it sort of flows in the back like that?
I call it unkempt. And
okay.
I was a student in Germany at the time, and I didn't have time to cut my hair before the competition because I was practicing, and I just showed up. But now I look at the hair and I think, wow, that was nice to have hair.
And so there's a few recordings that exist that I've been able to find and video of you playing from 1990. But if you don't mind, just sit back for 7 minutes and listen and watch with me and kind of just let your thoughts pour in, and then whatever memories come. And then when it's over, we'll reflect a little more on that competition. But also I want to talk about the music and what you're doing with it. But first, we will listen.
gosh. Apart from the hair, probably should have had longer socks. I can see my legs. Yeah, I specifically remember actually walking off stage and feeling so disappointed with myself. And it's strange, listening to it now. I haven't listened to that actually for years. Certainly, I think, I was sincere in what I was trying to express. It was a kind of, how can I say, tight, very directed kind of performance, compact. And I think that was something that was important to me at that time to direct the formal aspects of the scherzo, to unite the piece as a dramatic form, and not to allow it to sort of sprawl or just sort of become episodic. And that was pretty frenetic for my way of playing at that time. I would say, quite conservative in a lot of my choices, but I wanted to express that demonic quality in this scherzo. I remember having read Chopin traveling to, I think it was on either his way to or from Berlin, that he stopped in Dresden, I believe, and he saw a performance of Faust. And I think this is sort of the closest that Chopin would get to a sort of Faustian work, possibly the scherzo of the second sonata, which you can sort of see as a Mephisto waltz. So I was trying, to really show that side of it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a kind of play between demons and angels, and that inharmonic relationship between C sharp and D flat, as we also know from the Raindrop Prelude and many other Chopin works, is most dramatically expressed in this piece, isn't it?
The battle between the A and the G sharp for me was always important. That's throughout the piece, and how he transforms that to a B flat and an A flat in the hymn that follows. But you can hear that metaphysical kind of battle between those two forces. And yeah, I think that is one reason that came across, is because it wasn't something that I had read. I just sort of experienced it, and it sort of has taken shape for me. I didn't really connect those octaves in the bass, these very pianissimo unisons in the bass.
Right.
Bass, until I had actually gone to Valdemosa and performed there. And then it sort of clicked. He wrote this when he was in Mallorca. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if that was the sort of the reference there, sort of a chant-like monkeyan sound.
Well, there's these sort of shadowy monastic figures having conversations with angels. I mean, you feel the darkness and the light at the same time.
Absolutely. It's the mystery. That's what it's metaphysical. It's a metaphysical work.
It also has one of the most sublime codas, I think, that he wrote. And the fact that he chooses C sharp major as the ultimate destination, I wonder if that has symbolic implications too. Why not D flat? Has he resolved the sort of demonic aspects of C sharp minor into its own, parallel major without resorting to the enharmonic? I don't know. This is getting a little nerdy, but what do you think of that?
That's not something that occurred to me, but that's a wonderful idea. I certainly think that there is a difference in sound from C sharp major as opposed to D flat major. That there is a sharpness, there is a brilliance, a cutting kind of edge to C sharp major. That whereas D flat major, if you look at his compositions, so many of them had to do with more lyrical and roundish sort of figures. The D flat Nocturne, 27 number 2. And I think what really sets this thing up is that the beginning of the closing with the long pedal point over 2 pages, just hanging on to that, that bass note, that dominant bass, preparing, and then finally just boom, exploding into the coda. He knew exactly how long to make you wait before that moment. It's like sort of pulling back the bow and arrow and then just boom, off it goes. I recorded this scherzo on a period instrument, on an 1848 Pleyel. I find that experience to be liberating. I think it's too easy to sort of judge a period instrument by the values of the 20th century or the values of, for instance, the modern Steinway that has the long sustain in comparison with a 19th century Pleyel, or even more so with a Viennese instrument, a Buchholz, like what Chopin was composing on when he was a teenager. Those instruments have very little sustain. There's a lot of decay. But what's beautiful about them is, in fact, the decay. The fact that when you're playing rather rich textures, you can hear more. It's more transparent. It's not as thick and homogenized. I find, in a very strange way, the experience of decay is so human. It is just so mortal that when you play, say, a nocturne, when you have just a single melody and you hear the decay of a tone, that experience of loss is so much more poignant on a period instrument.
Let's hear a little passage from your recording on a period instrument here from the same scherzo. We've talked a lot about the third scherzo. Of course, there are 4 of them, and perhaps the most neglected, I might say, at least among students, but even listeners. I often hear students trying to play the first one. I don't know why a teacher gives a 13-year-old that first scherzo, but they do a lot. And I played the second scherzo when I was a teenager, and the third scherzo is very popular. I think my favorite might be the fourth now, and I think it doesn't have the same kind of dramatic contrasts perhaps as the others, although the middle section is very sparse and contrasting, but it might be the most scherzo-like of all 4 in the sense of there's something light and jovial and prankster-ish about the fourth scherzo. Could you speak about this piece and what makes it remarkable for you?
The fourth scherzo, if you look at the figurations that he uses, I'm reminded of a lot of the figurations from the Stil Brillante, from his earlier Warsaw period. It's often played in very staccato and energetic. The sforzatos are very sharp. But if you really look at the score and you see how he's articulated that, a lot of the figures, they're smoothed out and they have that sort of veil in the sound. It's in the pedal, it's in the portatos rather than staccatos. The way I read it is almost like a Chopin who is reflecting back and remembering with that certain lens, that filter of time that colors the music in a way. So again, you could say it's cheerful, but I think you can only read the middle section of that, which is a really very sorrowful Italianesque kind of aria in duet, actually, at one point, that really explains the outer sections of the piece, and that makes it work as something of looking back, which is, again, that sense of loss, of remembering cherished things which can be no more.
This is Kevin Kenner performing part of Chopin's fourth scherzo in a live performance from Seoul in 2019. it's interesting that that kind of concept, which comes from knowledge that you get from learning about Chopin's life, from living with his music, can have a deep effect on how you actually play the thing. What you just described is not something found in the score. It comes from reflecting on what we know about Chopin the man. So it's never just one source of inspiration in your interpretation.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me a little bit of some lectures that I listened to a few years ago, BBC Wreath lectures, wonderful series, and they featured Hilary Mantel. She died a couple of years ago, but she was a historical novelist, and she was talking about historical documents and how we only really have a record of what's left on record, which is pretty minimal. Historical documents don't really tell all that much about the past. Maybe 10% or something, because it's something written down usually after the living fact. We can say a score is very much like that, and a score is extremely important, but it must be understood that the real work of the artist is being the historical novelist, to actually apply fiction to that score. And the way you do that really makes all the difference. And the point is to bring it to life and to understand that even Chopin himself, whose scores differed, as he would send one manuscript to one publisher and then change it when he sent it to another, that his view of the score was actually probably very fluid. And so we can see the score as a kind of sketch. So it's important as a starting point, but never the ending point.
I'm partnering with the Chopin Foundation of the United States, which is based in Miami, where you live. And of course, you're very acquainted with them. And you're going to be judging, one of the judges in the 2025 National Competition there in Miami in January. I wonder if you could reflect on your own experiences in Miami. Talk about, I guess it was 1990, before you went to Warsaw. You kind of had a go at all of this repertoire in Miami itself. So could you talk a little bit about that experience and just what Miami, I suppose, has meant to you in your career, especially as it centers around Chopin?
I won the second prize. Harold Schonberg was on that jury at the time, which was really very special. And I remember speaking to him afterwards, and he had said, it's not really your fault. I don't blame you for the way that you play. It's probably your teacher. And that stuck with me as well. Because
what did he mean by that? What was he looking for? And
certainly, Harold Schonberg was a great fan of the stylistic traditions of pianism in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and that is something that I wasn't really familiar with at that time in my life. Again, this is part of my journey, and now I am fascinated with that. But my goal has never been to imitate or copy any kind of style, but in many ways to be a maverick, to be sort of the no labels performer. I don't want to ascribe to a style because that's not art. Art only begins when you transcend style. But that experience in Miami was very special to me. And now, of course, I'm heavily involved in the Chopin Foundation, from the other end and being on the jury. Yeah, and hoping as a juror and as chair of the jury that I do all that I can to make sure that we have fair results that do service to the merits of these young performers.
I would be remiss not to ask about just a controversial aspect of not only the 1990 competition, but also the 1995 Warsaw Chopin competition. And I would add actually the 94 Tchaikovsky. I don't know what was in the air in the 90s, but giving gold medals in those three competitions didn't take place. And so you were the top, literally the first prize winner in the sense that nobody placed above you in 1990 in Warsaw, but the jury chose not to award a first prize in either that or the competition that followed it. What happened there? I mean, what was that about? And if you could just speak to what that meant and what that was like.
I remember the press speaking to me right afterwards and saying how I felt about it. I said, well, I was a bit disappointed. But actually, when it came out, I think it was in the New York Times or something, or one of the big American papers, they had not actually written what I had said. They said that I thought it was a bitter disappointment, not a bit disappointed.
Oh,
I don't know exactly what happened because the scores were never published. But I can say this much. Because of that experience, it has made me reflect on the value of thinking that a performance of art somehow has some absolute way of being measured against another performance from 5 or 10 or 15 years before. To me, this is kind of ludicrous to make those sorts of value judgments, to sort of say, well, this wasn't on the level of Christian Zimmermann or Martha Argerich, so we're going to withhold it. I've made a point that whenever I have the choice to be on a jury, I have never suggested that they should abstain from giving a first prize. The competition is there to give opportunities for musicians to be heard, to give them a platform. It's not really any valid way of saying who is this good or not so good. In the end, the value of a person's art will be judged by the people in the audiences who they play for years and years. That's the real jury. And so I very much support the idea of giving a first prize in any competition. I feel in some ways, in my own experience, it actually gave me a lot of impetus to prove myself, to really work hard and not take anything for granted. Maybe what held me back a little bit is that I started believing that I really was sort of a second prize pianist. And that is the unfortunate thing. It can really mess you up psychologically. But in my case, I tried to use it for in a positive way, to just simply work hard. I remember Andrzej Jashinsky told me, who was on the jury of the 1990 competition afterwards, his advice to me was, you should practice more. And so I did. I practiced more. Absolutely. The things that I've learned from not being the first prize, I think that I was more willing to listen to what critics, what jurors had to say about my playing, and I took them seriously. One experience shortly after I won the competition, I was on my first tour of Germany, and I played in the Herkules Saal in Munich, and was reviewed by the foremost German critic at the time, Joachim Kaiser, from the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and he reviewed my concert with the title, Blue Flowers Made of Paper, and then went on to say that my playing lacked Sinnlichkeit, sensuality. And I was really shaken up by that review, and I took it to my teacher in Germany at the time, in Hanover, and I showed it to him, and he looked at it and he said, yeah, he's right. He's right, And 7 or 8 years after that, I was performing another concert in Germany, in Bochum, in the Ruhr Festival. And Joachim Kaiser was assigned to moderate my concert of the Chopin 24 Preludes. And after that concert, I reminded him of his review of me, and he couldn't believe it. He said, I can't believe, because your playing has a lot of sensuality. But you see, I think what it was is that his words really resonated with me. They gave me an impetus to really address those issues. And so as much as being a second prize winner or not receiving top prizes can be psychologically damaging, they can also really be used in a positive way.
So I suppose we can say there were many silver linings to your silver medal.
Oh my gosh. Oh, gee.
I've been sitting on that one for like 5 minutes now, so.
You've been waiting. Yes. Okay.
Kevin Kinner's ties to Miami and the Chopin Foundation are many. He moved to South Florida to accept a teaching position at the University of Miami just before the 2015 competition, where he served on the jury. He then served as the chair of the 2020 competition jury as he will again this coming January. After moving to Miami, Kevin was invited to serve as an artist advisor for the foundation and collaborated with them to launch the Frost Chopin Academy and Festival at the University of Miami in 2018. Since then, and over the course of 6 editions of the festival, Kevin has brought the likes of Dong Taeson, Garrick Olson, Dina Yaffa, Dmitry Ablogin, and others to Miami as guest teachers and performing artists. Between the Chopin Foundation, the National Chopin Competition, and the Frost Chopin Academy and Festival, Miami has become the mecca for Chopin's music in the United States. The scherzos have long dazzled audiences at the International Chopin Competition, giving competitors an opportunity to show off their technical wizardry and flair for the dramatic. While tickets to the 2025 Warsaw competition recently sold out in a matter of minutes, tickets are still available for the US National Chopin Competition in Miami this January. The top 2 US prize winners will win automatic admission to the main rounds of next year's competition in Warsaw. Although the scherzos aren't required in the main rounds of these Chopin competitions next year, you can expect to hear them as elective pieces added to the 2nd or 3rd round programs in both Miami and Warsaw. To purchase tickets and reserve your seats in the hall in Miami this January, follow the link in the podcast show notes or the YouTube description. I will be there in Miami in January, having been invited by the Chopin Foundation to host the live streams of every round of the National Chopin Competition. I'd love to see you there in person, but if you can't make it there, be sure to subscribe to the Chopin Foundation YouTube channel where the performances from all rounds will be broadcast, and enable notifications so that you don't miss a moment from the Miami competition.